Welcome to Global Truth. This is your host, Dr. Nasir Baig. Today, we are examining a geopolitical seismic shift that is transforming international relations. The accelerating worldwide boycott and isolation of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his administration. To grasp why leaders, international courts, and global institutions are severing ties, we have to look back at the harrowing humanitarian record that brought the international community to this tipping point. The destruction inflicted upon the Palestinian population has been documented by human rights organizations and legal bodies worldwide under the framework of systematic war crimes and genocide. We have witnessed the deliberate weaponization of basic human necessities. Infants and children starving in hospitals as food shipments and medical aid were blocked at border checkpoints. We saw humanitarian aid convoys and makeshift relief camps fired upon as civilians gathered simply to claim bags of flour for their families. And among the most horrifying details documented by field observers were reports of cluster submunitions deployed across civilian neighborhoods. Some designed with bright, toy-like casings that drew curious children into picking them up before detonating. For a time, Western political establishments attempted to maintain a standard diplomatic status quo. But over the last 2 years, the cultural wall of silence broke wide open. Look at Hollywood. At the Academy Awards, some of the film industry's most prominent figures refused to stick to superficial talking points. Spanish Oscar-winning actor Javier Bardem, he used his platform to deliver a blistering condemnation of the civilian slaughter in Gaza, demanding immediate international sanctions and accountability. Beside him, actor Mark Ruffalo, the Hulk, wore pro-Palestinian lapel pins, using every red carpet interview to call for an immediate end to military funding and an end to the occupation. And it isn't just cinema. The movement has taken over international athletics. During championship victory celebrations, 18-year-old football phenomenon Lamine Yamal hoisted the Palestinian flag high during the victory parade. The image of one of the world's brightest young sports stars displaying solidarity sent shockwaves through sports media, symbolizing a generational shift that political leaders can no longer ignore. As cultural icons spoke out, governments found it impossible to maintain normal relations. What began as public outrage has hardened into formal state actions. Consider Southeast Asia. In Malaysia, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's administration moved to enforce strict deportations for any Israeli nationals found within the country. While Malaysia has long held no formal diplomatic ties with Israel, an investigation exposed a tech facility in Johor known as the Network School, where Israelis with dual nationalities were entering on secondary Western passports. The response was immediate. Federal authorities executed investigations and closed loopholes to signal that no backdoor entries would be tolerated amidst ongoing military operations. Then came Europe, where long-standing diplomatic bridges were dismantled. In a historic move, Spanish President Pedro Sánchez formally and permanently withdrew Spain's ambassador to Israel, Ana María Salomón Pérez. Madrid explicitly downgraded its presence in Tel Aviv, leaving the embassy under the direction of a lower-ranking Chargé d'Affaires, Francisca María Pedrós. Spain's action sparked a domino effect. Across Europe and the West, governments moved from symbolic statements to hard economic blockades. A growing list of major Western democracies, including Britain, Spain, Canada, and Italy, have all enacted partial or total suspensions of arms sales, military exports, and defense licensing to Israel. When foundational NATO members refuse to supply replacement parts, munitions, or defense systems, it signals a structural breakdown in military alliance. While the world closes its doors externally, Netanyahu's internal domestic foundation is fracturing as well. To understand how fragile his coalition has become, look inside the halls of Israel's own parliament, the Knesset. Netanyahu took to the podium to force through a bill shielding ultra-Orthodox Haredi draft evaders from military service. Consider the political friction. While ordinary Israeli families were burying their dead and reservists were being called up for repeated tours of duty in Gaza and Lebanon, Netanyahu pushed draft exemptions purely to appease his far-right coalition partners and maintain his prime ministership. The chamber erupted, opposition lawmakers stood, pointed directly at Netanyahu and drowned him out with shouts of shame and leave. The atmosphere was so hostile that Netanyahu left the chamber before the vote concluded. When a prime minister is shouted down inside his own parliament as a national security liability, the narrative of domestic unity collapses. Simultaneously, the legal vice is tightening globally. The International Criminal Court in The Hague issued binding arrest warrants of Benjamin Netanyahu, designating him a war criminal for crimes against humanity, specifically citing the deliberate use of starvation as a weapon of war. While Israel and the United States dismissed the court, claiming lack of jurisdiction because they're not signatories to the Rome Statute, all 27 EU member states are legal signatories. The EU's foreign policy leadership confirmed the binding nature of the warrants under international law. If Netanyahu sets foot in Germany, France, Spain, or any EU state, those governments are treaty bound to arrest him. Combined with his active domestic trials for fraud, bribery, and breach of trust, Netanyahu is boxed in, unable to visit Europe without facing handcuffs, and unable to leave office without facing domestic prosecution. That brings us to Washington, historically Israel's ultimate diplomatic and financial buffer. Even here, deep structural cracks are appearing. Dissent inside the US government has spilled into the open. While President TJT spent months claiming the war in the Middle East was effectively won, War Secretary Pete Hegseth appeared before Congress requesting a defense budget exceeding $1 trillion to keep military funding pipelines open. Critics inside Congress questioned why American taxpayers' money is being asked to underwrite a $1 trillion constitution of a war that Trump claimed was over, calling it a war that Israel wanted. At the same time, Vice President J.D. Vance delivered a surprisingly direct public rebuke during a White House press briefing. Addressing Israeli cabinet ministers who criticized American diplomatic decisions, Vance delivered a blunt reality check. Donald J. Trump is the only head of the state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world. Vance pointedly reminded Israeli leadership that 2/3 of the defensive hardware is built by American hands and paid for by American tax dollars, concluding anybody in Israel who thinks their biggest problem is the president of the United States needs to wake up and smell the reality of the situation that country is in. Yet, Washington remains locked in a contradictory tug of war. On one hand, draft provisions in the US Defense Authorization Bill seek to integrate US and Israeli defense industrial bases more closely than ever. On the other hand, congressional pushback has reached unprecedented heights. 103 members of House Democratic Caucus voted to cut $3.3 billion in direct military aid to Israel. Over 100 lawmakers voting to strip military aid marks a historic breakdown in bipartisan policy. Nowhere is this clash more visible than in America's largest city, New York. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani established an anti-war platform from the start of his mayoral run. Just weeks after launching his campaign, Mamdani appeared on Fox News and stated he would exhaust every effort to ensure Netanyahu pays for his war crimes. Mamdani later made history by boycotting the annual Israel Day parade in Manhattan, the first time a sitting New York City mayor skipped the event in its 62 years history, breaking a streak that had been upheld by every mayor since the parade's inception in 1964. As the UN General Assembly approaches this September, the standoff reached a boiling point. Speaking to the New York Times, where Mamdani stated that his administration was in active discussion with the city's legal department regarding whether local authorities could detain Netanyahu if he arrives in New York or not. Mamdani explicitly declared, "I believe Prime Minister Netanyahu belongs in The Hague. He's a war criminal who has been charged by the International Criminal Court." The reaction from Washington and Tel Aviv was immediate. President Donald J. Trump posted directly on Truth Social declaring Benjamin Netanyahu will not be arrested in any way, shape or form while in the United States of America. He's fighting against the Islamic Republic of Iran. The only ones that should be arrested are the people that led Iran into this unprecedented spiral of death and destruction. Mayor Mamdani then released a formal video statement clarifying the city's legal position. Acknowledging the limits of municipal power, Mamdani stated that while New York City lacks independent legal authority to enforce international warrants on its own, the responsibility falls squarely on Washington. My administration has reviewed every avenue available under applicable law to determine whether New York City could execute the International Criminal Court's arrest warrants if Benjamin Netanyahu came here. It is clear that we do not have the independent legal authority to enforce this warrant. The federal government, however, does, and I call on them to join the ICC and execute this warrant. Benjamin Netanyahu is not welcome in New York City, nor is any other war criminal. The political fallout was swift. New York State's Assembly member Simcha Einstein, she sent a formal request to investigate whether Mamdani violated state law simply by exploring paths to arrest a foreign leader. Meanwhile, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Dennon, launched a fierce counterattack telling Mamdani to do your job for New Yorkers rather than pushing Hamas propaganda, and declared publicly that if anyone should be arrested, it's Mamdani. Well, what all of this reveals is an undeniable historical turning point. Israel's strongest ally, the United States, has become a house deeply divided against itself. The unquestioned political consensus that shielded the Israeli government for decades is fracturing across state houses, city halls, congressional chambers, and generationally on American streets. Support for Palestinian liberation and human rights, once marginalized as a minor political whisper, has expanded exponentially, gathering unstoppable momentum from a trickle to a stream, and from a stream to an overwhelming river that no politician or policy can hold back forever. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Take good care of yourself.